Every country on earth is drowning in debt, but the numbers do not explain the real story. They distract from it. 38 trillion in U.S. federal debt. 9 trillion in Japan. 315 trillion worldwide, more than triple the entire global GDP. Economists call it unsustainable. Politicians call it a long-term challenge. But here's the paradox that should make you stop and question everything you have been taught. If everyone owes money, who exactly is everyone paying? Who sits at the end of this global chain of IUs? Because when you trace the flow, when you follow every bond, every note, every interest payment from Washington to Tokyo to Brussels, you find something unsettling. The world does not owe money to a single villain, a single empire, or a shadowy cabal. The world owes money to itself. A circular system closed, self-referential and designed so no one ever truly escapes it. But here's the part your textbooks do not tell you. That circle was not an accident. It was engineered, piece by piece, century by century. 4 men, 4 turning points, 4 decisions that locked governments into a system where debt is permanent, interest is eternal, and escape is mathematically impossible. And none of this is conspiracy. The documents exist. The contracts exist. The decisions were made in broad daylight. Yet almost no one outside economics or finance understands how each piece connects to the next. To understand the trap, we start in 1604 when war was swallowing Europe. Before this moment, kings borrowed the old-fashioned way from merchants, nobles, or goldsmiths. They made promises, paid interest, and if they could not repay, they defaulted embarrassing but survivable. Creditors lost money. The market reset. Debt was temporary. Then came William Paterson, a Scottish merchant, whose schemes had failed so many times he was considered brilliant but reckless. But in 1601 he had an idea that would reshape the economic architecture of the world. England was losing its war with France. King William III was desperate. The treasury was empty. Tax revenue was insufficient. Traditional lenders would not touch the English crown because it had already defaulted multiple times. Paterson's proposal was shocking for its time. He would gather wealthy merchants to lend the government $1.2 million, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. But with a condition no one had ever suggested before: the principal would never be repaid. Not late. Not eventually. Not ever. In return, the government would pay 8% interest forever. And to manage this mechanism, Paterson proposed a new institution. The Bank of England, a privately owned central bank operating under a royal charter. The structure was revolutionary. The merchants deposited their gold. The bank lent it to the government. The government paid interest through taxes. And the banknotes, the receipts the merchants received, were tradable. They functioned like money, but stronger, because they generated income. Here's the twist. Since the principal would never be paid back, the debt became effectively perpetual. A government annuity. A guaranteed stream powered by taxes extracted from the population. As long as England existed, and as long as it could tax, the interest flowed upward. But Paterson's true genius came later. The Bank of England was given the authority to issue paper money, backed not by gold, but by the government's perpetual debt. The moment debt became collateral for money creation, the system transformed. The more the government borrowed, the more money the bank could create. Debt was not a problem anymore. Debt became the engine. This model spread like wildfire. France copied it. The Netherlands formalized it. By 1790, Alexander Hamilton used the same blueprint for the United States, praising Britain's financial system as the most powerful mechanism ever invented to bind a young nation together through shared, permanent obligations. Paterson never became a titan of finance. He died modestly in 1719, but the machine he built survived him. The UK has maintained continuous national debt ever since. It has never been paid off, only expanded, only rolled over, only multiplied. By the 1800s, Europe was addicted to debt. Wars, infrastructure, colonial ventures. Everything was financed through perpetual borrowing. But the market was fragmented. Bonds were local. Investors were local. And defaults still happened. Until the next architect arrived, Nathan Rothschild, the man who industrialized sovereign debt into a global commodity. And once he was finished, no government could default without risking the collapse of an entire international system. His innovation would make the debt trap not just permanent, but global. By the early 1800s, Europe was a battlefield. Empires rose and collapsed within years. Borders moved like waves. No government was stable, no currency was reliable, and no lender wanted to risk funding a nation that might not exist next winter. Then came Nathan Mayer Rothschild, the man who transformed national debt from a risky local instrument into a borderless, liquid, global commodity. Before Rothschild, sovereign borrowing was slow, regional, and dangerous. A government might issue bonds in its own city, maybe a neighboring capital, and hope someone would buy them. Investors relied on rumor. Prices were inconsistent. And when war erupted, which it often did, the entire bond market froze. Nathan saw opportunity where everyone else saw chaos. He built a financial network unlike anything Europe had ever witnessed. 5 Rothschild brothers stationed in London, Frankfurt, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. 5 cities. 5 currencies. 1 coordinated system. Information moved faster through the Rothschild couriers than through any royal messenger or military dispatch. Speed became power. When governments needed money to wage war, rebuild cities, pay soldiers, or survive revolutions, Nathan had something no one else had. Instant access to capital across the entire continent. And then he made his move. The innovation that changed the nature of government debt forever. He standardized sovereign bonds. He forced governments to issue debt in forms that could be easily bought, sold, traded, or transferred in any major financial center. Suddenly, a Prussian bond could be sold in London. A French bond could be traded in Vienna. A British bond could be purchased in Naples. Debt became portable, fluid, universal, and most importantly, default became unacceptable. Because once bonds were global, a government default did not just hurt one city or one group of lenders. It could crash markets across Europe. Rothschild engineered a system where the safest path for any nation, even in defeat, was to keep paying interest. This was not conspiracy. It was math. The Rothschild model synchronized Europe's finances. When Britain needed gold during the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan arranged shipments across borders, moving bullion through hostile territory. When France needed to pay reparations in 1815, he financed it, and by doing so, prevented a collapse that could have dragged half the continent down. By mid-century, Rothschild bonds were the backbone of Europe's economies. Governments depended on them. Investors trusted them. Wars were won and lost based on who could access the Rothschild network. But this stability had a cost. Debt was no longer temporary, no longer local, no longer optional. It was now a permanent pillar of the international order, managed and enforced not by kings, but by markets. A country could change its ruler, its constitution, even its borders, but it could never escape its obligations. Nathan died in 1837, but the architecture he built survived him. His sons and grandsons continued the empire. By the early 1900s, European nations were so tightly bound by debt that their financial markets rose and fell together, a precursor to global financialization. But there was one problem left unsolved. Europe could be unified by debt, but the world could not. That transition from regional financial system to fully global one required the next architect, a man who understood industrial capitalism better than any banker alive, a man who would use America's rising power to finish the transformation, John Pierpont Morgan. By the late 1800s, the industrial world was accelerating faster than governments could control it. Railroads stretched across continents. Steel mills operated day and night. Nations were no longer competing through territory alone, but through factories, shipping routes, and capital. This was the world, Jay. P. Morgan stepped into a world where financial stability had become as crucial as military strength. While the Rothschilds mastered sovereign lending, Morgan mastered industrial finance. He did not just fund governments. He funded the infrastructure that defined nations. Railroads, electricity grids, communication lines, coal, iron, steel, the skeleton of the modern era. But his greatest contribution was not the companies he rebuilt. It was the principle he imposed on the United States. No modern economy can survive without a central authority capable of backstopping its debt. The wake-up call came in 1907. That year, a panic erupted across U.S. markets. Banks collapsed. Trust companies failed. Depositors lined the streets demanding their money. Wall Street froze. For weeks, the country hovered on the edge of a complete financial breakdown. And the U.S. government could do nothing. There was no central bank, no lender of last resort, no unified mechanism to stabilize the system. So the nation turned to one man, a private banker. J.P. Morgan locked the country's leading financiers inside his library, refused to let them leave, and forced a coordinated rescue, pooling capital, guaranteeing credit lines, and preventing the collapse of institutions whose failure would have taken the entire country down. In effect, Morgan acted as an unofficial central bank. And it worked. Within days, the panic stopped. Markets reopened. Confidence returned. America realized something unmistakable. One man had saved the financial system, but no system should rely on one man. That moment led directly to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, an institution designed to ensure that the United States, unlike Europe in earlier centuries, would never again depend on private networks to survive crisis. With the Fed came a new model. Government issues debt. Central bank stabilizes the market for that debt. The entire financial system builds on top of it. This model spread across major economies. Then World War I accelerated the shift. Nations borrowed on a scale never seen before. War bonds became national campaigns. Citizens financed governments. Banks underwrote entire militaries. And when the war ended, the debts did not disappear. They formed a web connecting the U. As Britain, France, and Germany in a cycle of payments, reparations, and interest obligations that none of them could fully escape. The system became global, not by design, but by necessity. World War II expanded it again. The United States emerged as the world's financial anchor, supplying credit, production, and security. Europe rebuilt through the Marshall Plan. The dollar became the foundation of international commerce. By 1944, at Bretton Woods, the world formalized what had already become reality. A global debt architecture with the uso as dollar at its center. From that point forward, every nation needed stable currency reserves. Every reserve system needed a benchmark. And every benchmark pointed back to the dollar, supported by U.S. Treasury bonds. What began as regional lending in medieval Europe had evolved into a unified global structure spanning continents. A system where public debt fuels national budgets. Private debt fuels growth. Central banks maintain stability. Markets enforce discipline. And confidence, not gold, becomes the ultimate collateral. Today, that architecture carries the weight of the modern world. Every major crisis from the Great Depression to 2008 to the shocks of the 2020s has tested it. Each time, the conclusion is the same. We live inside a system built over centuries, shaped by merchants, bankers, governments, wars, and technology. A system that can bend, strain, and shake, but cannot easily be replaced. This is the world we inherited. A world powered by credit, protected by central banks, and held together by the belief that nations, no matter how turbulent, will keep their promises. The global debt system is not a flaw of modern civilization. It is modern civilization,